And why was he taken down? Because I don't think he was taken down because in 2019, all of a sudden, now he says it's all a Democrat hoax.
Was Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring actually a CIA and Mossad intelligence operation? Why do key figures in the case keep turning up dead in suicides? Is there a meta-cartel of spies and billionaires secretly running the world? Why are both Democrats and Republicans now trying to bury the entire case? Investigative journalist Whitney Webb connects the dots and exposes the shocking truth.
Well, there's definitely information that they should put out there, I think. So, for example, the FBI raided Epstein's New York townhouse. They were reportedly binders, CDs full of multimedia content, all sorts of stuff. We don't really know what was on those. We had Pam Bondi, the attorney general, say, "Oh, it's on my desk," and then is saying, "Oh, well, we can't release it because it's all CP, it's child porn." After saying like, "Oh no, it's implying it was releasable." But there's also a lot of strange things that would be interesting to know. Like, why did the FBI, even though they raided Epstein's residence in New York, why did they not raid Zorro Ranch in New Mexico? Another property within the continental U.S. Why did it take them up to a month to get to his island in the U.S. Virgin Islands? As far as I'm aware, those delays are unexplained. What about the France case? Jean-Luc Brunel, one of the main alleged co-conspirators of the Epstein case, died in a French prison awaiting trial, much like Epstein in 2022. And we don't really have a lot of information from French authorities about what they found as part of that investigation, because obviously with Brunel not going to trial because he died, it's not going to come out in the court, right?
Also died by hanging and no surveillance footage as well?
Well, I'm not sure about the circumstances of the death, but it was pretty much, I mean, it's kind of shady, yeah. I mean, there was another death related to Epstein in 2022. Mark Middleton.
Yes.
That was completely bonkers.
Hanging and shotgun.
Yeah, hanging by police say that he hung himself with an extension cord and also shot himself in the chest. Said there was no weapon at the scene, later came back and said there was a weapon 30 feet from his body. And then the judge sealed all evidence from ever being made public to stop the spread of harmful conspiracy theories. So Brunel dying in prison, I'm not really aware of the circumstances, but Do
you want to explain the connection of Brunel and Middleton to Epstein?
Well, they're separate connections.
Yes.
So Brunel is a lot more connected to Epstein in the sense of the sex trafficking case. So he and Epstein worked together on this modeling agency called MC2, where under the guise of modeling contracts, Brunel would coax a lot of women from places like Brazil, from Eastern Europe, and in Russia, among other places, to come model in the U.S. Epstein would pay for their visas, among other expenses for this agency, and they would come to the U.S. and be housed at these apartment complexes that are there's multiple attestations to that being a key part of the sex trafficking.
According to Whitney Webb, key figures in the Epstein network, like Jean-Luc Brunel, used modeling agencies as a front for sex trafficking, while Mark Middleton provided Epstein's access to the Clinton White House. These two figures reveal both the political and operational depth of the criminal network.
Operation, allegedly women's passports were taken, so they were, very controllable under those circumstances. Yeah, so, I mean, Brunel was a key part in that sense, and he also operated stuff out of Miami and Palm Beach. He had modeling agencies there, and he was known as far back as the 1980s to be an alleged sex trafficker and sexual predator. There was a 60 Minutes expose about him, and then an author, I think his name is Michael Gross, wrote a whole piece about, a whole book about the dark side of the modeling industry, and a key focus of his work was Jean-Luc Brunel. So he's, pretty well known as being an accomplice of Epstein in court documents and beyond.
And Middleton was at Clinton aide?
Middleton was the main person that Epstein was meeting with when he was going to the Clinton White House in the 1990s.
And he went a lot.
Well, he went 17 times between 93 and January 95, and Middleton left in February 95. So basically, there's a more or less a coinciding between the end of Epstein going to the Clinton White House and Middleton's ouster from there. Yeah. And in Middleton's suicide happened shortly after the extent of those meetings was revealed. So it was known that Epstein had been to the White House a few times, but they didn't, the full extent, the 17 meetings, most of them were with Middleton. That information came out in 2022, and a few months later, this incident with Middleton takes place. Yeah, sure. Because basically, if you go, as my books show, if you go as deep as I went in writing those two books, and you could certainly go deeper, it basically shows that, the world is basically run by a meta cartel. It's important to point out, when I say Epstein had a relationship with people, I'm not saying they had a sex blackmail relationship necessarily. Yeah. What we're trying to untangle here is the truth of who Epstein was and why was he taken down. Because I don't think he was taken down because in 2019, all of a sudden, the U.S. government became outraged about the sweetheart deal of 2007, 12 years after the fact, and then wanted to rectify some wrong. I think it was about something else.
What is, for you, there might be multiple answers to this, but the biggest unanswered question that you have?
Is it okay to swear?
You can say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay.
Although we're not meant to...
I'm not planning to swear too much. I just was curious.
We're not meant to swear in the first 15 minutes. YouTube doesn't like it. I think we'll be all right. Anyway, good to see you, Whitney.
Yeah, great to see you again too, Peter.
Beautiful part of the world. Okay, we're going to talk Epstein. The trail seems to have gone cold. We were promised all the files were going to be released.
Yeah.
The black book. And then suddenly there's nothing. There's nothing to see.
Well, there is the Black Book. That was released in 2015. But beyond that, yeah. So a lot of people were expecting all sorts of new information about the case. And there was this big, attempt at making it look like that happened with, a bunch of influencers came to the White House and had all these binders. And they were like, Epstein Files Part 1. But then it turned out a lot of those documents, pretty much all of them, had already been previously released. And I don't know, it seems like the administration was expecting like that would be enough to kind of satisfy people, because they did, the bells and whistles and made it look like that's what they were doing, but then didn't expect, I guess, people to be like, so what gives? And then with continued pushing, eventually, instead of getting more, we got this dramatic reversal to the point where now Trump, after a lot of the stuff about Epstein was kind of talked about a lot during his presidential campaign. Now it's he says it's all a Democrat hoax.
Very strange.
Strange is one word for it. Yeah.
Did you watch Kash Patel's interview with Rogan?
I saw clips from it, but I didn't feel like watching Kash Patel for 3 hours.
Well, so I thought Rogan did a great job. He was pushing Kash, but that was the point I started to think, this is getting a bit weird. And I started to question, well, there was an opportunity for the Biden administration to use this against the Trump administration. And there's been a chance for the Trump administration to use it against the Biden administration. And both administrations love dirt.
Yeah.
Both want to attack the other one.
Sure.
And now both are just kind of like...
Well, kind of. So with this recent reversal that we just talked about, a lot of Democrat congressmen are, kind of smell blood in the water, and we're calling to release the files and all of this. But I think neither party wants things to go too deep. So a lot of the benefit to partisan politics of the Epstein scandal, it only really is beneficial to either side if it's kept very superficial, And so I think, releasing a tranche of documents about everything would end up implicating, it would go too deep, probably. That's my assumption of why they kind of want to memory hole it now and sort of rebrand it as a hoax, which is kind of challenging because a lot of Trump's base has been very interested in the Epstein case, arguably more than the Democrats' voter base.
Webb argues that the Epstein scandal is used as a superficial weapon by both political parties. while a deeper investigation is prevented. This is because, according to her, the network's roots lie in a much darker, non-partisan alliance, a union of organized crime and intelligence services.
For years.
Yeah.
So basically what I argue in my book is that the network behind Epstein, and the reason why there's so many powerful people in this group, is because it's born out of this union that occurred during World War II between organized crime and the nascent U.S. intelligence apparatus, which of course there was a lot of British involvement with that when in the creation of, the CIA and the OSS and all of that in World War II. But that alliance officially happened. It's known as Operation Underworld. Even though the U.S. intelligence community denied it for several decades, they now admit it. But that alliance, it was justified out of wartime necessity. We have to team up with the mob to win the war, right? But after the war, the alliance provably continued. So, ultimately, essentially what happened then is that a lot of these rackets that were previously of organized crime, arms trafficking, drugs trafficking, sex trafficking, prostitution, whatever, became, rackets of intelligence services.
In what way?
Well, I mean, there's a litany of evidence of the CIA being involved in drug trafficking and arms trafficking via illegal means. For many decades. And a lot of those networks that the CIA used go back to the same nexus. I mean, that's basically what volume 1 of my book is about.
But why would they be in bed with these criminals?
It's great business. The CIA in the OSS were really mostly Wall Street people, Wall Street lawyers and bankers. And it was great business for them to team up with these people. So basically it's a new market. It's a illegal market with state protection. And so the CIA, more often than not, has gone over the competition for those markets. And that's why you have all these scandals, but no accountability for the CIA being involved in drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and all sorts of scandals over the years. But there's never been any accountability since, there was an effort with it at during the Church Committee in the late 70s. But since then, the CIA investigates itself and exonerates itself every time.
Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to get my head around this. So whilst the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, is meant to be protecting U.S. interests abroad,
they define U.S. interests, I think, as something than what the American public is. So if you look at the CIA's earliest coups, their earliest regime change operations, they were done on behalf of very powerful multinational corporations, like Anglo-American Oil in Iran, and the United Fruit Company in Guatemala, some of the earliest examples. So to them, protecting U.S. interests is protecting the interests not necessarily of the American people, but of massive American-based, multinational corporations.
So it's all economic defense?
In a sense.
Arguably economic defense. Because wasn't the Guatemala, didn't they remove a kind of socialist leader who wanted to return land to the Guatemalans?
Yeah. Well, that historically has been the justification for a lot of it. And a lot of the justification was sort of Cold War era stuff. We don't want this leader to become close to the Soviets. Ergo, we must remove him from power. But, the means of that have been pretty scandalous, especially if you look at, what came downstream of some of those governments. In Latin America, for example, Chile being a notable example where, Henry Kissinger and the CIA in 1973 orchestrated a coup against Salvador Allende. And then,
according to Whitney Webb, the CIA orchestrated coups during the Cold War to protect the economic interests of multinational corporations under the guise of national security. This dark operational legacy created the environment for figures like Epstein to emerge, with Robert Maxwell being the key person to introduce him to this world.
And not long after, no. But remember, his mentors in this shady world of arms trafficking and all of that are Douglas Leese and Adnan Khashoggi, and they team up around this time. And Khashoggi in particular has relationships with Israeli intelligence, but it was actually a person who was known to have been working with Robert Maxwell and Israeli intelligence stuff, Ari Ben Menashe, that said that Epstein was brought before him by Maxwell, and Maxwell wanted him included in the stuff that they were doing for Israel, that stuff being, arms transfers. The other guy in the group was Nick Davies, who was the foreign editor for one of the publications that Maxwell owned at the time.
What year did Maxwell die? Was it 87?
91.
Was it 91?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because he feels like a successor to Maxwell.
In a lot of ways, yeah. So Maxwell was, I think he's misunderstood because a lot of him think of him as just a fraud and a grifter. And obviously he was those things. He did engage in a lot of illegal financial stuff. And the reason it wasn't exposed sooner is because he was very adept at keeping things afloat when they were insolvent. Right.
Yeah.
Moving money from here to there around. And I don't think his kids, Keen and Evan could keep up with that or do it the way he could do it. But Epstein definitely was, capable, I think. But Robert Maxwell was one of a series of deaths in 1991 that are tied to these intermixed scandals with Iran-Contra, one being Promise, in which Maxwell was also involved, and the other one being BCCI that we've brought up a few times. I'm not sure where you want to go from here.
Well, so I kind of want to understand what Epstein was doing in that period then in the late 80s, early 90s, because obviously most of us aren't aware of him until...
There's a lot of overstacking things. He's involved in a lot of pies. So his earliest stuff with arms trafficking was with Lease and apparently Khashoggi, and Lease had gone into this joint venture with Chinese weapons manufacturers, mainly the company Norinco. And they were sending a lot of weapons to Iran. So it was a parallel arms trafficking operation to Iran that was separate but related to Iran-Contra. And so that seems to be sort of his foray into it. And then obviously, Khashoggi is doing Iran-Contra. He's doing stuff in savings and loans and all other sorts of arms deals all over the world. And Epstein gets involved with Wexner in this period. He gets involved with Steve Hoffenberg and the Tower Financial Ponzi in this period. And he's doing this financial bounty hunting stuff. And a lot of the characters, that he gets involved with, and other characters that's not really talked about a lot, is Evangeline Gouletas. He ends up sharing an office with her for several years. And their attorney, the Gouletas family attorney, Alan Tesler, becomes involved with Leslie Wexner in this period. And he also is involved with the architect of the aforementioned Promise Software scandal, Earl Bryan, during this time. And so all these people start to sort of meld into these same scandals in the 80s, and Epstein was absolutely sort of enmeshed in this crowd.
Webb states that in the 80s, Epstein was involved in numerous dirty dealings, from arms trafficking to Ponzi schemes. However, what made him indispensable to these dark circles was his true talent, an expertise in esoteric tax codes and offshore banking, the art of hiding money for the rich and powerful.
What do you think drives
the 80s?
Is driving him at that time? Is it power and money? Is it just money? What drives all these people?
I think it depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear that Epstein was pervy. And when you're very powerful, you can get away with all sorts of stuff. And he was obviously sought after for his financial acumen, but I would say, again, it's offshore banking stuff. It's shady banking stuff that he was really good at. That was actually what he was sort of tapped at Bear Stearns for. He started, he initially started being like an assistant to someone on the floor of the stock exchange. And by the end of it was advising their wealthiest clients on matters relating to esoteric markets and the tax code. So
hiding money.
Yeah. So I think, it's pretty clear he was sought after, at least by these shady characters, for those purposes. Yeah.
When does the tap on the shoulder from Mossad come? What's the point where...
I mean, it seems like it's Robert Maxwell being sort of the earliest. But again, if you have, Lease and Khashoggi in the mix, it's possible it could have come a little sooner. But again, it's hard to know. Hard to know. But I mean, he had ties... Oh, it's important to point out that the head of Amman, which is the Military Intelligence Directorate of Israel, at the time that Maxwell sort of pushes out Epstein, was Ehud Barak. And according to Ari Ben Menashe, Ehud Barak was one of the higher-ups that Robert Maxwell referenced as having approved Epstein before he introduced him to Epstein.
Huh.
But supposedly Ehud Barak says that he didn't meet Epstein until like the late 90s. But there's a lot of these cases where people say, no, I met him way later, and all of this that have turned out to like not be true. Like Bill Gates, for example, saying it was like 2011 was their first meeting.
That was bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay. It's because we go from him being a guy involved in financial things to maybe some arms deal to a guy who owns an island and a plane.
It's hard to know how that happened, but I think it's somewhere in the late 80s because Robert Maxwell in the late 80s sort of plans his entry into New York from the UK. He decides he's like not liked very much in the UK at that point, and he talks about how when he goes to New York people like love him and how he thought that was great. But that isn't like the only reason. One of the main motivators here is that he was picked by this Wall Street bank, Rothschild Inc. It was created by the Rothschild family because they felt like they had neglected Wall Street, and wanted to sort of reestablish their dominance in New York finance. That's how they described it to the New York Times. And so they focused on mergers and acquisitions initially to get their foothold. And so they picked Jimmy Goldsmith and Robert Maxwell to be sort of their corporate raiders from their UK banking interests that made the entry for Rothschild Inc. in mergers and acquisitions into the US. And so you have Jimmy Goldsmith do the Crown Zellerbach play that I mentioned earlier, and you have Maxwell take over Macmillan, among other things, as part of this push into the US, financial system, basically. So in the same period of time that's happening, Robert Maxwell has developed a very close relationship with this mobster named Simeon Mogilevich. And he's helped him gain access not only to the U.S. financial system, but also the Israeli financial system by getting him a dual citizen passport, basically, through Israel, where Maxwell had a lot of connections. And it's known now, thanks to the work of Gordon Thomas, that it was and also Seymour Hersh, that, it was a very close relationship between Maxwell and Israeli intelligence. So he used that to facilitate the entry of this mobster into these different financial systems. And Maxwell actually built an alliance between people like Mogilevich and organized crime groups all over the planet, as far as the Japanese Yakuza, basically. So Maxwell should be known for a lot more than just
stealing the pensions.
Stealing pension funds. Yes. He should, of course, be known for that, too, because that's terrible, but he should be infamous for a lot more.
Webb also emphasizes that Robert Maxwell wasn't just a media mogul, but an operative who, with backing from powerful dynasties like the Rothschilds, integrated global organized crime leaders directly into the U.S. financial system. This formed the foundation of Maxwell's political and financial power in New York.
And so he's making his entry into the U.S. for these reasons, among other things. And he is sort of, when he gets there, he's tapped on the shoulder by these people that are all close to Leslie Wexner. They are members of this group that was established the same year, 91, that's called today the Mega Group. It's Wexner, Bronfman, and this guy named Lawrence Tisch, the Crowns, Lester Crown. A lot of them have organized crime ties historically that arguably persist to the present. And Bronfman's important here too, because after BCCI collapse, I mentioned earlier, Edmund Safra sort of seemingly taking over a lot. So one of those Safra banks was Bank of New York, and Edgar Bronfman was intimately involved in that at the time that it sort of became affiliated with Mogilevich financial interests, among other things. And Robert Maxwell starts having a lot of famous New Yorkers on his yacht, on the Lady Ghislaine, a lot of whom are tied to organized crime in some capacity, like Steve Ross, the former head of Time Warner, who built out the company that would eventually become Time Warner out of an organized crime front company, among other things. You have, there's a picture of him also with that guy, Ross, in Trump, that's pretty famous now. And also in that picture is John Tower, who was on the Maxwell and also Israeli intelligence payroll to facilitate their role in the Promise scandal. in that picture. And Trump, of course, had ties to, through Roy Cohn Roy Cohn was a guy that straddled political power in Washington with organized crime. He was a mob lawyer, but he was also very close to like the Nixon administration and then later the Reagan administration, very close to Bill Casey, and all sorts of other actors of relevance here. So this is an incredible swamp that Maxwell is swimming in this time, but he's basically sent there for this very powerful banking dynasty, but is also sort of fronting for a lot of these, criminal interests. And one of the people he hires to help guide his entry into the U.S. because he wanted to gain influence with all sorts of powerful politicians and powerful people, is Robert Keith Gray, who, as I mentioned earlier, not only had close ties to Bill Casey, Roy Cohn, and all of these guys, but was also a known blackmailer. So that might be where it started. How do you really want to influence politics and powerful figures in New York?
You need intelligence.
You need intelligence, yeah.
You need someone as a front to help gather that intelligence.
Yeah, and Epstein was already well connected to all sorts of networks, kind of like Roy Cohn straddling both worlds to an extent.
When you become a Mossad agent, how does that work?
What do we
know?
mean?
Like, you become an agent? You become... you're
so
compromised
there's
yourself?
agents, there's assets, there's all sorts of things you can do for the agency that taps you on the shoulder, as it were.
But are you tapped on the shoulder with incentives or with threats, or can it be both?
I'm sure it can be both.
And at that time, Epstein was probably incentives?
Well, I think he was already enmeshed in the Maxwell world. And Maxwell, again, is one of these figures that straddles organized crime and
He's one of
powerful
us.
Business
We can
and
trust
powerful
him.
banking, and had already been working for Israeli intelligence for some time.
And so he maybe introduced Epstein, said, he's one of us, we can trust him.
In essence, Whitney Webb suggests Epstein wasn't a lone criminal, but a product of a network where organized crime, global finance, and competing intelligence services merged. His introduction into this world by Maxwell was also proof of how deeply intertwined U.S. and Israeli intelligence truly were.
Well, that's what he did. That's what,
Yeah.
In the mid-'80s, that was already a done deal. But Epstein was also involved with U.S. intelligence, absolutely. But again, the Iran-Contra nexus, which is basically kind of what this is a melding of U.S. and Israeli intelligence and also figures that are assets for either both agencies or more, I
mean...
Like Robert Maxwell wasn't just involved with Israeli intelligence. He had involvement with British intelligence, Russian intelligence. I mean, he was kind of... he had his hand in a lot of pies, we'll put it that way. And Epstein absolutely was a person with their hand in a lot of pies, especially in the 1980s.
Is the Israeli intelligence and the US intelligence pretty much one of the same? Is it a very good...
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. James Jesus Angleton was one of the first CIA counterintelligence chiefs. There's a huge statue to him in Tel Aviv, thanking him for all he did. And there's been documents that have come forth since, basically showing that he was elevating Israeli interests over American interests, which has happened time and again in U.S. politics.
Of course.
That's what the neocons are known for, right? And you have someone like Bill Casey, too, who was very close to figures intimately enmeshed with Israeli intelligence, like Bruce Rappaport, for example, one of his best friends. And just, you have all these people having rather insidious business relationships. Even why, Casey's CIA director. And then you have this, what I mentioned earlier about sort of organized crime being an element here, because organized crime is transnational, right? And so this national crime syndicate that I've mentioned a few times is also a transnational thing. So Bruce Rappaport, who, is an Israeli nominally, he'd come to visit Bill Casey when he was CIA director. They go golfing together. His chauffeur would be a mob guy, an American mob guy. And there's a lot of examples of, the organized crime being all over the place. So some of my more recent work on the broader Epstein network focuses on Italy and some of the people there. And they seem to really all come from this nexus that was exposed in the 80s, this P2 lodge or propaganda do, it was called. It was a huge, huge scandal in Italy. A lot of people, it involved a lot of politicians. bankers, very powerful people that were basically meeting in secret. It was labeled a subversive organization by the government. It was operating as a Freemason lodge. And it was connected to the collapse of several prominent banks. One of the main guy that was going to go to trial for all of this, Michelle Sindona, was under 24/7 police watch to make sure he wasn't popped off. They were inspecting